for more on this decision from the government to open up 10 new sites for gas and oil exploration. I'm joined live by David Pocock, the independent senator for the ACT. Senator Pocock, thanks for your time. The Prime Minister, as we heard there, he says the government needs to be sensible about this. He says just because of their 82% renewables target does not mean that immediately you can stop fossil fuel sources today. Is the government just being sensible?
This is not a sensible decision. If we're going to listen to climate scientists, if we're going to listen to the International Energy Agency, they've been so clear that we cannot afford to open up new coal and gas projects. And this is exactly what they're trying to do. In Australia, we export over 70% of our gas. Clearly, we've got enough gas for the transition. We need to get on with the job of actually doing that transition. We can't, have a government who wants to have their cake and eat it too. We've got to get on with this now. And I think there's an expectation in the community. We've heard from the government a lot of the right talk around legislating a target, 43% by 2030, net zero by 2050. We need to see that actually happen.
Now, the government would disagree with that. We've heard Monique Ryan, your independent colleague, saying it's hugely disappointing. We can have secure electricity supply from renewables and our existing assets. That's not the view of the government. The Resources Minister says that oil and gas in Commonwealth waters and exploration for oil and gas is central to alleviating future domestic gas shortfalls. You disagree with her, obviously.
Gas clearly isn't the future. There are significant savings to be had at a household level as we electrify. We've seen what the international energy crisis has done to our domestic gas prices, despite us exporting so much of it. In WA, they've got an arrangement where they actually have to keep some of it for domestic use, which you'd probably expect across the board. That's not the case. And so we really have to get on with electrification of really gearing up in terms of renewables at the supply side, and then at households, actually working with them to get off gas, to move to electric appliances, electric vehicles. Across Australia, the average household could be saving up to $5,000 a year if we get this transition right. And we have to make sure that low-income households aren't left behind. Gas is expensive. The gas we're talking about exploring for now will not come online for years. So that's certainly not going to solve the current shortage that we have.
Madeleine King maintains that gas is this important transition fuel. The Prime Minister, in his language today, has a very similar message.
Well, I guess if you are...
You don't believe that it is a transition fuel?
I think we've got enough for that transition. I think it's necessary and crucial to keep expanding if you rely on the gas industry for political donations. But clearly, if we're going to listen to climate scientists, the IPCC was so clear, no new coal and gas, particularly for developed countries, simply cannot afford it. The International Energy Agency has said there shouldn't be any more coal and gas projects. So why aren't we listening to them? What are we doing if we're actually committed to 43%? And this really confirms the concerns that myself and the Jackie Lambie Network senators have had around transparency and accountability for these targets. If we're going to legislate 43%, we want to see how we're actually tracking, how we're spending our money should align with that 43% reduction and that net zero by 2050.
We've seen the vulnerability in gas supplies, particularly in Europe, off the back of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Isn't it also incumbent upon countries like Australia to have reliable supplies to trading partners?
We've seen one of our biggest trading partners, Japan, say that they're really going to start pushing towards hydrogen. That's where we should be going. We can be a renewable superpower here, but it's going to take courage and leadership to actually start to move away from fossil fuels, to be investing in these new technologies, taking the longer term view.
And will you seek to block any legislation that might be necessary around new oil and gas projects?
I've been very clear. We've got to listen to scientists on this one. We can't be opening up new coal and gas projects. And so I'll be putting a lot of pressure on the government to ensure that that happens. As far as the 43%, I think it's really important for certainty and for businesses to actually get on with that transition, that we do have a legislated target. It's going to provide clarity for the market. There's a whole bunch of other things that, this included, that suggests that the government wants to walk both sides of the street when it comes to the energy transition.
On the safeguard mechanism, which is a big part, so all very complex, but it's a big part of the government's efforts to have heavy emitters reduce those emissions to get to that 43% target. Would you seek to vote against any of the legislation that might be necessary around that mechanism because of this?
Obviously, I haven't seen that legislation yet. The way I'm looking at all this is through the lens of integrity. The safeguard mechanism has to have integrity. It has to actually be reducing emissions. That's what it's designed to do. That's what it needs to actually deliver. And I think that's going to be a really important part of the redesign, is ensuring that our biggest emitters are on a trajectory to net zero over time.
But you will be doing everything in your power to, if legislation is required for any of these projects, to stop them.
If we want to be able to look after other sectors like agriculture, like tourism on the Great Barrier Reef, we have to get on with the transition to renewables and start reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And we're not going to do that by opening up new gas projects, new coal projects.
The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Electoral Matters is looking at reforms, including donation reductions in terms of declaring who's made the donations, also potentially lifting the number of senators in the Northern Territory and the ACT to 4 from 2. Would you welcome that?
I would. During my campaign, I heard a lot from people in the ACT about their concerns about money in politics, the way that political donations are clearly having an influence on the decisions that are being made.
So real-time disclosures?
Real-time disclosures, looking at caps to make it fairer, so that everyone can actually participate. And there isn't this system where if you're a big corporate, you can be donating hundreds of thousands, but family down the street might donate a few $100.
But if the threshold for disclosure is reduced to $1,000, you'd welcome that as well?
Keen to see what's proposed. Obviously, this is all about negotiation and compromise, but clearly people want more transparency. They want more accountability from politicians, and they want to be able to have faith that and trust politicians that the decisions that are being made are in the best interest of all of us.
Why should the ACT and the Northern Territory have 2 additional senators?
So here in the ACT, our population is heading towards Tasmania's, and they have 5 MPs, 12 senators. Here in the ACT, we've got 3 MPs and 2 senators. So in terms of representation, I think there is a strong case. Again, this is about talking to the major parties and seeing what sort of appetite they have. But certainly the amount of correspondence and sort of incoming that you have, being one of just 2 senators for 450,000 people, it's a huge workload, and I'd certainly welcome having a few more representatives.
Senator Pocock, appreciate your time. Thank you.